Throughout the Second World War, many women took up arms to fight against the Germans across Europe. Women joined Special Operations Executive and would be trained as spies in an espionage, with many being parachuted behind enemy lines to work and connect with the French resistance. A number of them were condemned to death after they were captured by the Germans, and some were transported to concentration camps. Some experienced horrific executions, including 4 SOE agents who were thrown into a furnace alive inside of a concentration camp. For the Germans, they were disgusted that women were taking up arms against them, and they saw this as the furthest away from where they believed women should be in society. However, in the Pacific, there were many women who took the fight to the Japanese in the Philippines, and these became a feared opponent of the Japanese, who were known for committing terrible atrocities and war crimes. But what is the story of the women warriors that slaughtered Japanese soldiers? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Japanese had been at war for years before the Second World War even broke out in Europe, as they had been committing scores of atrocities across China in cities such as Nanking. But when they attacked Pearl Harbor, this was considered one of the first steps in their attacks on Southeast Asia. The day after the attacks, the Japanese began to target American and European bases and lands in the region. From the 8th of December 1941 to the following May, the Japanese attacked and assaulted the Philippines, and it resulted in the Japanese occupation of the lands, with the Filipino and Allied forces surrendering after being overwhelmed. Because of this, 80,000 prisoners of war were forced to move and locate to prisoner of war camps. They were forced on death marches, for example the Bataan Death March, and this was a harrowing experience. The Japanese would mistreat the prisoners of war, and the Filipino civilians saw this as barbaric firsthand, and they also witnessed the evil and killings of prisoners of war at the sides of the road, where Japanese forces would leave them dead in their wake. Those men and women who attempted to give the marchers food and water were also often killed using bayonets for their actions. But the Bataan Death March acted as the beginning of the Japanese military's treatment of the citizens of the islands. They brought in aggressive policies which punished and persecuted, as well as tortured those who were sympathetic to the Allies. Foreign relations would be ended, and because of this there was a sense of resistance that emerged inside of the Philippines. This was a grassroots resistance element, and many different people joined, from peasant farmers to warriors, and men and women also tried to join the fight for their country. One specific part of the fighters were women, who were guerrilla soldiers who made a significant amount of impact towards the liberation of the Philippines. Many women saw this as a chance to liberate their homeland from evil, and their efforts showed that women were able to fight evil, to bear arms against an enemy during wartime. They were a key and vital element of reconnaissance missions, as well as attacking groups of Japanese forces in the jungle, where they had the upper hand over the enemy, as they knew the landscape. For every 10 male guerrilla fighters there was 1 woman who was in the underground. They made up 10% of the fighting resistance force, and they were made aware of the risks they faced. They knew they could be forced to work as comfort women for the Japanese if captured, but despite the risk of death and assault, the guerrillas fought valiantly to liberate the people from the Japanese. Many of them served as medical officers and nurses. For example, Dorothy Dowden, a woman raised in Mindanao, worked as an aide who helped Allied soldiers and guerrilla fighters, whilst also helping her family to escape the horror. Many nurses provided key medical assistance for those who were suffering, and some even helped the prisoners of war in the region, despite there being no hospital, and also very little supplies. They would risk their lives to smuggle medicine in the prisoner of war camps, and they would also train other guerrilla groups first. Josefa Capistrano was a Chinese Filipino woman who trained women as soldiers, nurses and spies, and she schooled them in reconnaissance work, self-defense and how to use a firearm. Her women also established spy networks that would link up and exchange information. Women could obtain this information and spy on the Japanese, then inform the Allies about their locations and actions. Some women even became trained by the Allies in the use of weapons and guns. Another Filipino woman, Remedios Gomez Paraiso, or Commander Liweiwei, witnessed her own father being killed at the Japanese hands when he refused to cooperate. He refused to surrender the town, and because of this he was tortured and executed, and his body was displayed in the town for everyone to see. Liweiwei then joined the rebellion, and she moved into the mountain camps where guerrillas were hiding. The anger of seeing her father's brutal slaying spurred her on to fight. She would then be involved in even leading men into battle and into victory against the Japanese. Nieves Fernandez was also a guerrilla leader. She was a simple Filipina school teacher, and she would defend her homeland against the Japanese forces after she saw many of her students being threatened to be taken away by the Japanese. She tried to protect the girls, as she knew they would be stolen into slavery as comfort women, but Nieves was a skilled bolo fighter. She was very well respected and led men into battle, and inside of the jungle she would attack different Japanese settlements and formations. Her 110 manned guerrilla unit would use homemade grenades and knives, as well as homemade guns to slaughter many Japanese soldiers, and it's believed that she was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of enemy fighters. She was known as a silent killer, and it's believed her army and men were responsible for the deaths of 1,200 Japanese forces. It got to the point where after 2 years of constant ambushes, the Japanese offered a 10,000 peso bounty on her head, but she would live and would survive the conflict. Maria Rosa Henson was another woman who fought against the Japanese, but she had a very tough experience. She was a young girl when she was growing up during the war, and for her simple tasks like fetching water and getting food and shopping was very dangerous. There was a threat every day of abduction and execution that she faced at the hands of the Japanese. Regardless of age, many Asian women were assaulted by the Japanese forces, and she at the age of 15 was subjected to a horrific assault at the hands of the Japanese who invaded her home. She then took up arms, and she then carried reconnaissance for the Hooks unit, and she was captured and was arrested. After her arrest, she was forced into becoming a comfort woman, and she would still try to help her people, and she was able to relay information about raids in the local area. She continued to serve her country after the war, and is considered a national hero. The Philippines would be liberated from the Japanese on the 15th of August 1945, when the Japanese were ordered to surrender by Tokyo, following the dropping of the atomic bombs. In the whole occupation, thousands of people had been killed, and many had been imprisoned by the Japanese. There was a huge amount of death on the islands. It's believed that in the liberation, 420,000 Japanese forces were considered dead or missing, which was significantly more than the Allied losses. But the Japanese had done their damage, and they had caused terror across the nation. But a number of women were incredibly brave, and they rose up to resist and fight the Japanese, despite the fact they faced the threat of horror and assault on a daily basis. These women had a lot to risk, including their lives, and lived very dangerously, but women such as Nieves Fernandez were a constant thorn and threat in the side of the Japanese forces and their army. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.